Thanks for tuning in. We are the Designated Pundits. We're previewing each and every one of the 30 Major League Soccer teams ahead of the 2025 Major League Soccer season. And today, we're talking about the Portland Timbers. Make sure if you're seeing us for the first time, you hit that subscribe button. You could find us on your favorite podcast platform. You go to youtube.com/@thedesignated-pundits, thedesignatedpundits.com, our new look website with all our fresh links on top there. Or you could just type in The Designated Pundits on your favorite podcast app. 30 Major League Soccer teams, and it's getting more each and every year. But today we have one of the best, Sam Svilar from formerly Stumptown Footy. Thank you for making the time to be here with us tonight. I like the fresh brown and yellow track jacket. Fantastic look.
And this was a gift I got, and it's part of like that their third kit collection that they put out last year. But as soon as I saw it, I'm like, I need this, and thankfully somebody liked me enough to give it to me. So it's still Stumptown Footy, by the way. It's just at a different place. It's on Substack now. So
I don't know what that is. Does that surprise anyone? We should probably have that. That would probably bring our podcast to the next level, Scott.
We should probably look into that.
It's basically just an email newsletter that we've kind of repurposed into a blog site, and it's going okay so far. So it's been nice.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time here to be with us tonight. We're starting the same show, every show the same way, and that is by asking you your favorite 2024 soccer memory.
Oh, gosh, that's a great one. I think just off the top of my head, the first thing that came to mind was, which is probably the best game of Portland's 2024 last year, which was the win at home over Seattle, where the Timbers Army unveiled a Texas Chainsaw Massacre tifo with like a fish head cut off. They won that game 1-0, and then Timber Joey busted out like a real live fish and then gutted it live on the log in front of the Timbers Army. That was pretty cool. And that leading also to Portland winning the Cascadia Cup. That was a pretty cool moment. If I had known what was about to transpire a week after they won the Cascadia Cup, I probably would have enjoyed that moment a little bit more.
What a best moment, Bob. That's probably the darkest best moment that we've had so far in our preview season.
If that tells you a lot about where we're at mentally going into 2025 for the Portland Timbers, I think that's a good reflection of it.
I just talked to Jose Nunez from Philadelphia, and he talked about how he had his favorite moment was getting press credentials for Bolivia, something that he, honored his late brother by doing it. And this is completely out of it. I want to know if Timber Joey really has experience actually gutting fish. Like if it was like a clean cut or if it was just for show.
That's a good question. He definitely strikes me as the type of guy who would practice. Like he's probably like at home with like piles and piles of fish. He's not actually eating, but he's just practicing like dicing up. He definitely seems like a guy who knows his tools. I don't think they let him wield that chainsaw literally everywhere in the stadium unless they knew he would probably be responsible with it. So
awesome. Fair. Let's talk about 2024. 12, 11, and 12 record for the Portland Timbers. 12 wins, 11 draws, 12 losses. 9 wins, 5 draws, 3 losses at home. 3 wins, 6 draws, 9 losses away. It was a tale of two cities for Portland. 65 goals scored, 61 goals conceded. That gives a +4 goal differential. That is a very high number of goals scored, which is fantastic. That is a very high number of goals allowed, which is also fantastic if you run a betting show and want to be taking both teams to score. They were dismantled by Vancouver in a wild card round, 5-0, something that we probably didn't see coming. That was the shock of the season. Let's talk a little bit about 2024, just about 500 record, and man, at home, it was lights at 1.88 points per game. On the road, 0.83.
Yeah, I think year one of the Phil Neville experience in Portland, I think was defined by that goal scored and goal conceded stat. They had, I think, one of like the top 3 or top 4 offenses in the league. One of the best goal scoring teams in MLS behind, I think, just like Inter Miami and the Galaxy and LAFC, something like that. And they had like one of the bottom 5 goals conceded numbers also in MLS. So those like extreme high highs and extreme low lows, that was kind of the story of 2025. They had 3 double-digit goal scorers, Felipe Mora, Jonathan Rodriguez, and Evander. I'm sure we'll talk about him in a little bit. And then they also just conceded goals left and right. And it was something that it wasn't like one specific type of goal they were conceding, except for, I guess, set pieces. They were awful at defending set pieces last year. But just their structure and the way they would defend, it would make individual mistakes all the more glaring. And those individual mistakes kept happening. There wasn't a lot of cover. And so that's how you keep conceding goals. And that's how you get pantsed by the Vancouver Whitecaps at home, by the way, in the wild card round.
They started off with 2 wins and a draw, but then dropped 0 wins, 3 draws, and 6 losses over their next 9 games. The thing that I'm really seeing is that a lot of those games were away games. Not a lot of games are played at Portland in the winter, so it was definitely a slow start for Timbers this past season. Let's take a look at who did all that scoring. Jonathan Rodriguez, Cabecita, that's the nickname?
Yeah, I think he doesn't like that nickname, so we've kind of just leaned more towards calling him Jonah. It's yet to be seen if he's developed a new nickname. He's got to do something this year. He's got that a little bit of that, like, Sebastian Blanco kind of like FU energy. So I'm waiting for him to like truly piss like another player off and then do something that will earn himself some sort of nickname or like viral moment.
Love it. Evander, 15 goals, 15 assists. Felipe Mora, 14 goals, 2 assists. Santiago Moreno, 6 goals, 10 assists. Anthony with 6 and 4. And Juan David Mosquera, 1 goal, 4 assists, rounding out the top sheet here. I mean, you got 5 guys here.
Yeah,
scoring goals. And with Moreno and Anthony, I mean, these are guys who did not play, or Anthony certainly, week in and week out. That could have been tripled.
Yeah, I think starting with Anthony and Santiago Moreno first, Anthony is Phil Neville going into the start of 2024 said, oh, Anthony's been the player of the preseason. He's been the best player. And we're like, all right, that's interesting because Anthony barely played much in 2023. And then he scores a brace in the home opener. And we're like, oh, okay, I guess we see what Phil Neville was talking about. He had a little bit of an up and down year. It was inconsistent. He's still a young player. He's still just, I think, 22 years old. So he's still kind of finding his form, particularly in front of net. 6 goals is great. He could have had more, maybe, if he had a little bit more accuracy with his shots or was a little more decisive in front of the net. Santiago Moreno, in a weird way, like this was statistically, like with goals and assists combined, his best season with the Timbers, but he kind of was anonymous for stretches because often he was kind of seen to be the next goal scorer. Like, okay, if none of the front 3 or, Rodriguez, Evander, and Mora can score, it's got to be somebody else. Everybody looked to Santiago Moreno, and he was also inconsistent in being that like next option. But the main thing was, those top 3 there, Jonah, Evander, and Mora, they were just a incredible 3-headed monster. I think they're the first trio of designated players to score double-digit goals or something along to the effect until the Galaxy did it with their trio that same season, but it was an incredible output from them. I think the biggest surprise was Rodriguez. I think because he was signed. I was on this show last year, and we're like, oh, I think they might sign Jonathan Rodriguez. I'm like, all right, that's interesting. And I think the expectations going into the season were like, really, we're paying a lot of money for this guy, and he's like on the other side of 30. Who knows what he's going to get? He had a great debut season, so I think he's going to kind of be seen as like you're going to have to be one of the guys, not just for like the Timbers perspective, but just to help kind of tie the whole team together.
He plays big too. I mean, I see him here 5'10", 183. When they have to be that specific with a number, it's closer to 190. But he plays large, and I think that's kind of a nice addition to the squad. Let's take a look at the roster changes heading into the 2025 Major League Soccer season. Outgoing, Ikoba, Mason Toy, Eric Williamson. That was a little surprising for me. Marvin Loria. I mean, Eric Williamson, that's like the true box-to-box midfielder, and that I think is going to be a little bit missed by the squad. Is that how you guys see that loss working out?
Yeah, if you're talking about outgoings and which one kind of like hurt to see, he's probably the first on that list of being like, man, it's a bummer to see him go. It's not necessarily shocking. If you looked at the writing on the wall, Williamson hadn't really risen to the level of like top level MLS starter that I think he was kind of pegged to be. And he's had some issues with previous coaching staffs with Giovanni Savarese. He had a spat with him. been inconsistent with his injuries. He's had 2 ACL tears over his time in Portland. So I wasn't necessarily shocked to see him moved, especially when you look at some of those incoming names and, where this roster kind of needs a little bit of refreshing. That being said, it's a bummer to see a player of his talent leave, because it's clear he's got a lot of talent with playing as that number 8 box-to-box role. He put in probably his best game of the season in the first game of the season, having to kind of run the show in midfield, and he did great. So to see him leave kind of sucks. It also sucks to see the return that Portland got for him. I think it was just something like 150 or 250K GAM plus a little bit of extra depending on performance incentives. And this was a player that I think just 2 seasons ago we were talking about for like league record transfer fee potentially, or GAM going one way or the other. So it was a little bit of a bummer to see him leave.
On the incoming players, you got some guys here. Ariel Lassiter, played in Canada for quite some time. Kevin Kelsey, João Ortiz, Ian Smith, and I'm going to... it's always like a guess this game. I'm going to guess that the J is silent and say Himir Fori.
It's close. We haven't gotten a definitive answer yet. I have to hear him say his name. We've said Ymir Fori just because A, that's our guess, and B, it sounds cooler. It might be Jimmer, it might be Himir. I'm not sure. He's yet another Colombian coming into Portland to play fullback. He's an exciting player. He used to play with Juan David Mosquera, same club. They never quite overlapped, but they know each other. So there's some built-in help to help him get settled into MLS in Portland there. Ariel Lassiter is a nice, just veteran pickup. He's played on, I think, like 5 or 6 different MLS teams. So he's good wing depth. He can also play wing back in a pinch. Kevin Kelsey is their next U22 player. He's a center forward. He's like a project. It's exciting to see Portland actually have a young forward that hopefully will develop over the years, because it's mostly just been veteran after veteran they're bringing in. João Ortiz is the signing that, as of now, I'm the most excited to see going into next year. He's a 28-year-old central midfielder, can play box to box, is known best for his ability to win the ball, to transition the ball into attack. He could be the player that maybe kind of helps ease Diego Chara into like a lesser role or lesser minutes going to this year, which it pains me to say, but it's got to happen at some point. Yeah. So seeing him play, he's been impressive in some of the showings for preseason. You always got to take a few grains of salt, but he looks like the part of a day one starter, plug and play, and could really do a shift for this team in midfield.
I have a quick question before we move on. Is there anything about these, especially the incoming signings, that surprises you, either by what they did do or maybe what Portland hasn't done here?
Yeah, I think it's intriguing that they didn't go get a center back. I think that was something that we kind of thought that they would do. As of now, the center backs in the 2025 roster are the exact same that they ended with 2024. And when you look at their defensive record, that might raise an eyebrow or two, because when you can see that many goals, you immediately think of, oh, we got to fix the central defense. I think based upon some of the comments that general manager Ned Grabavoy were saying, and maybe how we were thinking, how he was looking at the roster, he talked a lot about players that maybe need to have a change of scenery, or we need to kind of move some guys along to kind of refresh the locker room. They got like 6 center backs on the roster. So we thought, oh, it's going to be one of them, but they're also there. They haven't brought in anybody new. It's seeming to me like, at least when you're talking about the back line defensively, Phil Neville is kind of betting on his guys to improve, or at the very least not get worse going into 2025, which is admittedly a big bet in MLS, because you just never know what kind of defense you're going to get, or how well they're going to play on like any given week.
And it's always strange for me because Kamal Miller, I see him as such a high end center back, but he's been on some of the worst pairings that you've ever seen in Major League Soccer. Like, I think that he's going to be paired with someone eventually. I say this like every time someone says his name, and he's going to find a pair sometime and just lights out immediately. It just hasn't happened, and I'm expecting it to happen. I want it to happen, and this Portland squad would definitely be one here. Before we move on, I do want to point out there are some typos on here. We spoke about them, and I guess I just didn't correct them. Cavini Kelsey is the favorite one. He's actually it's like the Waluigi of Kevin Kelsey.
Yes, he's Kevin Kelsey's Wario.
Here's a look at a little depth chart we put together, 4-3-3, if you will. And there's still some roster building because there's a big hole in the middle of the field, Evander-sized hole that we think is going to happen. We think there's going to be some movement, and we are going with this formation because we think that there's going to be a DP number 10, so we can just replace Evander's name with someone else when that comes along. But let's build out the back here. Maxime Crepeau, a very good, solid Major League Soccer goalkeeper, but behind him, James Pantemis, who's also a very good, solid goalkeeper. Let's talk about what they're doing there.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest surprise out of 2024 was how well James Pantemis played and how much he played in that wild card game. Do or die, must win game. You're supposedly playing your best 11 players. It was Pantemis who got the start over Crepeau. Now, it didn't end well. Is that all Pantemis' fault? Maybe not, but it was still significant that at the time, the coaching staff saw him as ahead of Crepeau, who they shelled out a lot of money for to sign in free agency. So far, it definitely looks like Crepeau has been starting with the first choice, quote unquote, first choice guys in preseason. So he's probably kind of going to be pegged as like, you're actually going to be the starter this year. But that doesn't cover up the fact that for Crepeau standards, which is, winning MLS Cups, anchoring backlines like LAFC's, which were, pushing for trophies, pushing for CONCACAF Champions Leagues. He didn't hit those standards last year. I think there was a little inconsistency. And again, it might not have been all his fault, but that's going to be something to watch this year. If the defense doesn't improve, if you're seeing maybe some shaky goals that Crepeau concedes, maybe Pantemis is step up. It's a good problem to have like a really solid, serviceable backup goalkeeper. Not many MLS teams can say that.
Absolutely. Let's move up a level and talk about the center backs. We already covered it a little bit. Kamal Miller, who I think is fantastic. Miguel Araujo behind him, paired with Zuparic, and some pair of Zach McGraw, Finn Sermon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the name to watch there as the season progresses is definitely Finn Sermon. He is somebody who the Timbers have kind of pegged as like, he's going to be like a lights out center back in like a couple of years. He started one game last year, and that was all he played, just 90 minutes. It was all he got, and it was the last game of the season in Seattle for getting a good play position, for getting the Cascadia Cup, and he played really well. Yes, they conceded a goal, but he made several really great tackles and didn't look like the moment didn't look too big for him, so that's a plus as the season progresses. Zuparic has been with Portland for, I think, now 6 or 7 years, so he's a mainstay back there. Zach McGraw is a name to watch if you want to say, okay, who's the player who's going to leave? He has a lot of value as far as like he's a young player. He has citizenship. He has a lot of experience. He's on a pretty team friendly contract this year. So if there's any Timbers player that's going to be traded for some sort of, for some sort of something else the other way, it might be him is kind of my guess.
Awesome. Fullbacks. We have Claudio Bravo behind him, Forey and Eric Miller. On the other side, Juan Mosquera, Miller and Jura behind him. Let's talk about not only the depth chart, but also what they're going to be responsible for on the field. Are they going to be looked at to get upfield, to overlap at all?
Yes, I think especially Juan Mosquera. They love to bomb him forward. They love to play him as a very aggressive fullback crossing in balls. You saw that in his assist numbers last year. He loves getting involved in the play. The intriguing part about this is I still believe a 4-2-3-1 is probably like the preferred formation. But during most of the preseason this year, they've been playing some sort of back 3, back 5 system with players playing wing back. So we've seen Juan Mosquera being a wing back, which I think suits his strengths a lot more than maybe having to play defense. He did improve defensively last year for what it's worth, but him as a wing back makes a lot of sense. And they've been playing, Claudio Bravo, Jemer Forey, Ian Smith, who's a rookie who they just signed. He's been playing there. They've been playing Anthony as a left wing back. So they're kind of trying some things with the fullbacks there to try to get more attackers into high and wide positions, which I think fits this team pretty well.
But if you're playing a 5-man back line, you need 3 center backs. There's not 3 center backs on this. You need 5 center backs if you want to play with 3, right?
Yeah. I mean, they only really have, I would say, 3 solid level starters, Miguel Araujo, maybe a 50-50, but so far it's been Kamal Miller, Dario Zuparic, and Zach McGraw. That's kind of been the trio, which they're big. I mean, they're 3 very large humans. And so me and the Stumptown Footy team are kind of been joking that the Timbers' whole thing this year is just a bunch of tall guys and a bunch of fast guys, and we're just gonna try to run and just try to do it. Which, if you conceded all of I think they conceded something about 12 or 14 set piece goals last year. Yeah, getting some big guys in there might not be a bad idea.
Might help. Who got sacrificed? If you're adding a third center back in, somebody's got to come off the field. Who was that?
Yeah, it's honestly, if you look towards the midfield, that's kind of what it is. It would essentially be that center, the center midfielder number 10 position of Evander. That is essentially not being there. So it leaves with just, they've been starting Joao Ortiz and Diego Chara. I think before long, as the season progresses, that main pairing is going to be Joao Ortiz and David Ajala. Those are two very high level players. So the shift to that formation is A, get our fullbacks higher, get attacking. Also, B, we don't have a number 10 right now. So let's just focus on maybe getting some more solidity in the back line and then just kind of focusing on attacking up the wings.
So, so something we really might see if the Evander saga, continues to drag out and maybe doesn't resolve itself in Portland's favor. I am curious about this center midfield pairing. Joao Ortiz, Diego Chara, David Ayala, maybe Christian Paredes behind them. When I watched Portland last year, and this was especially evident in that final game against Vancouver, I thought the midfield was utterly overrun, too open. And there was a point where I was like, look, the defense are good players. The goalie's a good player, and they're just totally exposed because there's nothing in front of them.
Yeah, you are 100%.
How is that improving?
You're 100% spot on. That was a big reason that Portland's defense wasn't good. They couldn't transition well. There was just too much. There was not enough pressure that was provided towards attackers in the center of the field. So it left for the center backs to have to make really difficult choices to whether to step or whether to stay. It was through a number of things. A big thing was Evander, even though he was playing as a nominal number 10 midfielder, he wouldn't like to track back or defend much. So you're usually defending a man light. It was also, and I hate to say this, it was Diego Chara maybe losing half of a step or so, or a step. Just, he's still incredible. He can still play really well, and he's not as fast as he was. So some of that all kind of combined to make the midfield a point of weakness. And they went out and they got Joao Ortiz, which will hopefully help lead that to be a little more solid.
Hopefully. Well, let's move on up the field. We've talked about Evander. We won't, make Portland fans suffer too much through more of that. Let's go on to these wingers. Obviously, Jonathan Rodriguez on the left. We've got right now Santiago Moreno on the right. Is that how you see it? And tell us a little bit about what they are, doing in this lineup.
Yeah, I think that's about right. When Santi's healthy, he'll probably be starting. They both love to cut inside. They're not true wingers, heels on chalk, running, getting width. Jonah can sometimes play as a second forward, quasi number 9. So that's kind of their thing, is they'll mostly be kind of cutting in, supporting Felipe Mora. And then the width will usually come from the fullbacks if everything is working the way it's supposed to.
And go ahead.
Felipe Mora is an interesting player to me because I never saw him as a top end talent, but he's on such a prolific team that he shows up on the score sheet and he does all that. I thought that when Jonathan Rodriguez came in, he was going to take over Felipe Mora's job. We thought he was going to have that happen, but Felipe Mora put a pretty good season together last year. Talk about the striker position. What are your options moving forward?
Yeah, we thought the same thing. And Ned Grabovoy told us the same thing. He's like, oh yeah, he's brought here to play striker. And more often than not, it was Mora starting in front of Rodriguez. I think Mora is a very smart player. His positioning in the box is very good. He's always able to find good positions. He has a lot of familiarity with the team. That's why I think he's the starter until he ain't, until he's proven that something that can, he loses space or loses time. One thing to watch out for is his injury history. He was hampered through injury through 2022 and 2023. He was healthy most of last season, so can he keep that up? Like I mentioned, Kevin Kelsey, very intriguing sighting. He's another, tall guy. He's very big. He's strong. He has a little bit of MLS experience. He was on loan with Cincinnati last year. Has now been signed permanently by Portland. So he's another name for, he could be starting if he kind of can find a run of form, find some consistency. He could be an interesting option at center forward.
Before we move on, tell us a little bit about the depth there. Rotational options. Is it a drop off to Ariel Lassiter or Anthony if they're on the field?
I think I talked a little bit about Anthony, and his biggest weakness is his inconsistency. He's fast. He's a very willing runner. So he brings kind of a slightly different skill set. I don't think he has, as of now, as high of a floor as like Santiago Moreno does, but he could have a higher ceiling. It kind of creates just more of a different look. I think Lassiter is, he's a solid MLS vet. He's not a Jonathan Rodriguez. He's not a DP.
He's not challenging anyone for minutes anywhere. He's
probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so.
Awesome. Okay, one last thing, I guess, before we go on. Tell us about the evolution of like Phil Neville tactics, Phil Neville ball.
That's a great question. I think us in Portland, we're still kind of trying to figure that out. He likes to play aggressive. He likes to play aggressive fullbacks. He likes to essentially it's kind of like an NBA coach where it's like you just get the ball to your best players and just expect them to kind of work. That was the main kind of offense we saw last year, usually through Evander. He's talked a lot about how he's not really like set on one formation. He's more about principles than it is about tactic or formations. So we'll see how that comes out this year. My biggest question for him is, can he adapt? If the game's going sideways, can he adjust things so that his team is set up at a better spot to succeed? Because more often than not, he would kind of try to make a certain system work. And maybe that led to some wins turning into draws, some draws turning into losses last year. So can he kind of prove that he's, can adjust kind of on the fly?
Awesome. Now let's move ahead to some 2025 storylines. I put them as questions, but they're kind of just things we're going to watch. The first one is Evander. We talked a little bit off the air before the show. It seems like he's on his way out, but Portland wants to bring in another number 10 to replace him. So it looks like between him and Acosta, someone's going to get bought out and sent somewhere else. There's rumors of you'd have to refresh my memory on the name of the number 10 that Portland was looking at. And it seems like if he goes, it's going to be like, a couple of moves all around MLS, all around the same time. Everyone gets snapped up before the season. We'll have a lot of clarity, but there's no guarantee for that at all. So if you had a look in your crystal ball right now, Evander is in camp in Portland now, right?
He's in Portland, but he's not with the team. The team is currently down in California for the Coachella Valley Invitational. So Evander is training in Portland. That's all we know at the moment. I think if I were to kind of say which direction this is going to go, I don't see him starting 2020 the season as a Timbers player. I think based upon everything we've seen, everything we've heard, all of his comments, all of the deals that have been going through, Tom Bogert's been saying that he's immediately kind of a candidate for this new in-season cash trade system. Yeah. It just feels like Portland has more to gain by moving him than by kind of forcing him to stay in a situation in which he's probably just going to do this again in the summer. So as you said, it definitely depends on if Acosta moves us from Cincinnati, then Cincinnati comes into Portland to get Evander, and then Portland goes out and that player, David Pereira da Costa, he's a Portuguese midfielder. He's young, 24 years old, is currently playing in France. He would be the player that, from what it sounds like, it basically would be like, okay, cool, come on in, just really quick turnaround, which is positive, but yeah, it's all moving all at once.
What kind of roster flexibility do you have? I have Jonathan Rodriguez as a DP, Evander as a DP. Was there anyone else? I was a little unclear as to the financials.
Yeah, they're doing the 2 DP, 4 U22. Yeah, the 2 and 4 roster building model. From all accounts, it seems like that's the direction they're going to stay. They like having that extra allocation money. I think Portland's track record with signing U22 players has been pretty good. If you look at the players, Biscara, Ajala, Anthony, Moreno, I think they have confidence in their U22. So unless they're able to sell one of those U22 players this summer for a good amount of money, I don't see them bringing in a third DP. I see probably Da Costa being the next DP and kind of taking Evander's slot. If something changes, I wouldn't be surprised if they go to do that, especially if they're kind of closer to contention, like towards kind of like the upper half of that Western Conference table.
Sure.
Now, they had a pretty sick home-away split. How do they improve what's going on there? Looking at it, it's almost puzzling because you do see teams, of course, that are a little better on the road, a little better at home. But this was, we're talking 1.05 points per game better at home. Is there something they can do to improve that, or is there a play style? Is there something that we can kind of point to and say, this is the reason we were so bad on the road?
I think they were just too passive on the road last season. They would be a lot more reactive. It seems like, Timbers on the road have always been kind of known for, counterattacking soccer, win the ball, attack really quickly at pace. That was Giovanni Savarese's bread and butter during those years that he coached here. It seems like Phil Neville wants to have his team play on the road similar to how they play at home. The challenge is that they wouldn't be able to execute that. They wouldn't be able to really be aggressive and win back the ball. More often than not, we'd see them just get pummeled with shots, have such really lower possession numbers, or not really have dangerous possession. So I think the key is them being a little more active and a little more aggressive. Now that could let in more goals, but hopefully the individual mistakes can get cut out so that they're allowed to play that kind of way.
Plus 14 at home, minus 10 on the road in 17, 18 matches each. It's just wild to see that. In your opinion, what could be improved on this roster? Why is it the center back?
I think center back play, I think that's definitely something that I think needs to improve. As far as positions of where I'm mostly worried about depth, I'm looking at right back. Juan David Mosquera is very good. There is a pretty significant drop off to the next spot. They now have actually a large amount of left back depth. That wasn't the case a month ago. So that's not as much of a worry, but I'm worried about right back, and specifically what happens if Mosquera doesn't improve defensively or if he's sold.
Is there a concern about center back if the 3-back rolls out?
Oh, definitely. I think if, like I said, the bet is these players improve. If they don't, if Kamal Miller still can't get fully settled, if Dario Zupart starts losing his step, if Zach McGraw can't improve, then they're in trouble, I would say. I wouldn't be surprised if they make a move for a center back at some point sooner rather than later, if that's the case.
How warm would Phil Neville's seat be if this defense doesn't get better? Because when I think of, there are certain players around the league that played defense at a very high level, I would think if you put a gun to my head, hey, Phil Neville, is his team offensive or defensive? I would not have put them the top scoring team in Major League Soccer, and I would certainly not have them as being one of the leakiest defenses.
I think it definitely is going to get warmer as the season goes on, if that's the case. If this team continues to leak bad goals, if it isn't fighting for playoff contention, and what I mean by that is towards the middle of the table, upper half, if they're struggling, I think that seat's getting warmer. I think that Grabovoy's seat might be getting warmer too. They've been really bullish on this roster, clearly, because they've barely sent anyone out. They believe that this is the roster that can get them back to consistent playoffs. And if they're not doing that, it's well, you were wrong. Those are the types of bets that you lose jobs over.
Prediction time. First 3 questions are tied together. What is a realistic season outcome? What's the team's best possible outcome? And what's the team's worst possible outcome? I think the worst is really, really good for me in betting on the matches. I think that it's going to be conceding 2 goals every game. That is the worst that we're going to see. And that is going to lead them to, a lot of losses. I think that Portland right now has a huge range of possible outcomes. And a lot of that, to answer question number 4, is on the back of Evander and what he has to bring. I mean, that'd be 30 goal contributions gone in the blink of an eye if he's gone with your squad. So what do you think is a realistic, and then, your best and worst possible outcomes?
Yeah, I think co-sign to all of that. I think the worst possible outcome is if this team doesn't improve defensively, if they're still one of the worst defensive teams in the league, goal scoring, goals conceding, and they regress offensively. That would be the worst case outcome. And I could see that being they're hanging around 10th, 11th in the Western Conference, maybe pushing for a wild card spot. But that's kind of the doldrums where they've been since 2022. And I don't think anybody wants to see that. As far as a realistic outcome, I think somewhere around probably 5th or 6th, maybe 7th. I think just above that wild card game. I wouldn't be surprised if they are in the wild card game again. As far as best possible, I think if everything comes together right, if Portland figures out how to live life without Evander, if the offense improves, if the offense stays good, if the defense improves, I could see them pushing for top 4 in the West. Now, that's a lot of ifs that I just said. So I think this team is, like you said, it's a little bit of a magic box of what the huge disparity of they could be really good and really entertaining, or really bad and really entertaining. I think it's for a team that I've wanted consistency from for so long, basically ever since I've started watching them. I don't think 2025 is when we're going to see it, but I think it'll be entertaining all the same.
I think this team has a really good chance of showing us a lot of what we saw previously, which is an offense that is capable of putting up tremendously big numbers and a defense that is, at times really exposed and capable of conceding those numbers. And I think there's sort of a ratio going on, because you have a lot of offensive talent, even without Evander. And if Evander leaves, you probably replace him with a player who maybe doesn't have the 30 goal contributions in him right now, but he probably gives you a little bit more defensively. So I just see that those numbers just both sliding back at about an equal rate.
Yeah, I think that's the bet. They're like, okay, if we lose Evander, we're not going to score as many goals. Maybe we don't have to score as many goals. Maybe we can improve the defense through all of these signings, with getting more fullbacks in, getting Joao Ortiz in, maybe a change in system for how they play. Maybe all those things could combine. So that means we're not conceding 2 goals every single game. It's worth saying they weren't really blown out a ton last year, except for, of course, the wild card game. But it was consistently conceding 2 goals, conceding the first goal. Those add up.
71% of the time, both teams to score hit. And that is the kind of consistency we look for in the crazy chaos world that is Major League Soccer, being able to, do that. But if you look at their predictability risk score, 106%. I've never seen anything that high in my life.
That's a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's for the neutral, the MLS, Timbers were probably one of the neutrals' favorite teams last year. If you didn't have a dog in the fight, you probably loved Timbers games. For Timbers fans, it was like a heart attack every weekend for 90 minutes.
Love that for sure. Thank you, Sam, for coming on and previewing the Portland Timbers 2025 season. Let us know one more time where we can find your work.
Yeah, you can find us at Stumptown Footy, stumptownfooty.substack.com. It's where we publish all of our stuff. We also have a podcast of our own now, Stumptown Radio. You can find it on the Substack. We're also on Spotify and Apple. It's mostly just us just kind of chatting about the Timbers and the Portland Thorns. We have an episode every week, usually one, sometimes 2, one about each team, but we always kind of stay up to date on what's going on with all of Portland soccer. So it's a fun time. You should check us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us here. We'll have to do this again real soon. Always a great guest. Always a great time, Sam, when we have you on the podcast. Hopefully we have something to talk about real soon. Maybe we'll do a little update before the season starts on what this roster is going to look like. Your guess is as good as ours, but thank you for treading through the water here with us tonight. Thank you everyone at home for tuning in to the Designated Pundits.